After gaining independence in 1960, Nigeria was regarded as a potential economic powerhouse that would become the giant of Africa, as the country was regarded as the largest producer of groundnut and palm oil and second largest producer of cocoa in the world. Then all came and the economic direction of the country changed as oil became the mainstay of the economy and for economic power, of course, and was centralized. But after several oil booms, 1973, 1980, 1991, 2002, 2021, well, according to some reports, Nigeria has now become the poverty of capital, with debt rating and also insecure. After 6 decades of gaining freedom from Britain, economically, Nigeria is now, well, many say a lot of issues affecting the country, with all the important indices pointing to an economy headed for other issues. Well, developments. We don't know what could happen. Best scenario, worst scenario. As many say, many people will continue to be thrown under the poverty line. At the moment, unemployment is conservatively at 33.3%, inflation at 20.52%, public stock there at about 642 trillion naira, benchmark interest rates just raised by 150 basis points from 14% to 15.5%. Exchange rate has hit 735 naira to a dollar in the other market, with the takeoff of political campaigns. Now, after a period of 62 years as an independent nation, the big question begging for answer is, what is happening? Why are we still this state economically? Well, let's talk more about this and understand the real issues. And I'm being joined via Zoom by fiscal policy partner, Africa tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Taiwo Idele. Mr. Idele, thank you so much for joining us this public holiday. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Tolu. Happy Independence to you and our viewers.
Yes, I wish you the same. Let me start this way. If Nigeria were to be a working class professional, at the moment, it will be 2 years above statutory retirement age of 60. So what's your assessment of Nigeria at 62 after 60 years of service and, 2 extra years? What's your assessment? Some say broke, a little bit of savings, and high debt. How does it come to you?
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy because if Nigeria were to be a working class, it would have retired like 2 years ago. But I guess, thank God, it's not a human being. It's a nation, so we have so many years ahead of us. But the reality is, we look at Nigeria and we all agree that the country is not where we would like it to be. But we also have to always take a step back and say maybe things could have been worse, and look at the bright side and see what we can be grateful for. Because usually once you are grateful, you feel more positive, you have more energy to tackle the current issues and challenges that you face. For example, as of 1960, Nigeria's GDP was about $4.2 billion. Although we had just about 45 million people in terms of population. Compare that to today, when Nigeria's GDP is over 400 billion, and we are the largest economy in Africa. We have about 211 million people, depending on who you ask. But actually, if you look at it, our GDP growth rate has been, almost 100 times compared to our population growth rate, which has only just been about 4 times. So that is a remarkable improvement. If you also look at some other data, like exchange rates, so in the 80s, early 80s, Naira was stronger than the dollar. Today, unfortunately, in the black market, it's even more than 700. So if you look at that, you say our currency has lost value like 700 times what it was just not even at independence, but even about 40 years ago. So it's a mixed bag of things that have worked for us, things that haven't worked. I listened to your previous session, on agriculture, and some data have it that even as of today, if we had just sustained our leadership in terms of palm oil production, we'll be earning about $20 billion today in foreign exchange. And that amount is, of course, far higher than what we are making from crude oil as of today, if not even negative, that we're making from crude oil. We've also seen instances of, various plans. We've had brilliant economic plans from the colonial development plan of 1958 to 1968, to structural adjustment program, to needs, to strategy for attaining the Millennium Development Goal before it became SDGs, to 7-point agenda, Vision 2020, ERGP more recently, and so on and so forth. And currently that we're working on Agenda 2050. So all these plans have always been very brilliant. The issue has been with execution. We are not very good with execution, and sometimes when we do execute, we don't do that using data and evidence, such that people are pulling in different directions. And there's a lot of vested interest, a lot of sometimes incompetent people in positions. And what the implication of all of these has meant is that we haven't been able to optimize our potentials as we should have. And therefore, we now today have a lot of people in poverty, such that the global, poverty clock says we are the poverty capital of the world. We have, infrastructural deficits. We are not able to provide employment for our teeming youth. And we could have been doing a lot more. The issues we face today are self-inflicted. We have been very lucky in terms of blessings from God, whether you're talking about natural resources, whether you're talking about human resources, and we are not prone to natural disasters that can just come and kill thousands of people. So really what we need to fix is ourselves, our approach to the economic management, social issues, even our economic philosophy. We don't have a clear philosophy. Is it a private sector-led country that we are building? Is it a collaborative one? Is it a social one? Is it a capitalist? And then do we want to ensure that there's prosperity so people can afford whatever it is that is market-led? Or do you want to continue with subsidy to say people are poor, let's keep prices artificially low, which then distort the market and compromises our ability to create even prosperity for the people? So, overall, it's been a mixed bag, but I think we can look back, look at the bright spots and be grateful, look at the areas where we could have done better, take the lessons, and then move forward more stronger as a nation going forward.
Indeed, we need to look at those areas where we can do better, so we really leverage on that and move on with it. But the recent one, or the one that really bothers me, and I'm sure bothers many Nigerians, is brain export that is happening at the moment. Nigerians are moving out by the day, and we know what is happening across markets. Even those doing well with their jobs are leaving the country, and this will definitely tell in years to come. What impact do you think this would have on a country like Nigeria that is still struggling to even find its foot, with all of its intelligent ones almost leaving?
Yeah, interestingly, we just released a report at PwC on this particular subject, where we are of the view that Nigeria is in a competitive position to export brains without people physically leaving the country. You're right. Quite a number of people are leaving the country, but I have to put it into context and perspective that it's not as bad as people are making it to look like. If you look at the data, the number of Nigerians that are living legitimately outside Nigeria are barely 2 million. So that's less than 1% of our population. I saw some data also recently from the UN suggesting that the global average is about 3.6% of people living outside their country. For Nigeria, that percentage is about 2%. So even when you add the illegal migration, to it, the figure is not that huge.
Okay.
Maybe the whole number of people that have exited the country this year will definitely be under 100 to 200,000. So it's not as massive as we make it look like. Countries like India, Philippines, they have far more people leaving their country. But having said that, it doesn't take away the fact that this is a concern, particularly when you see a country where we have deficiency of human capital in certain areas. Take, for example, healthcare. So we treat our doctors, medical workers badly. We don't appreciate them, and then we allow them to leave. And then when they go to developed countries, and then our leaders are ill, they go there and those guys will take care of them. The same thing we're doing to university lecturers. I don't even know of any sector where we really appreciate what they're doing. We tend to not appreciate what we have, sometimes until we lose them. So Nigeria has to develop a strategy around human capital. By the way, for a country to really develop and be able to maximize its potentials, there are three key areas of focus. One of it is to do with institutions. You have to build very strong institutions. The second one is infrastructure. You need to provide infrastructure to enable economic activities from road to port to electricity and so on. And the third one is human capital skill. And this one goes to the heart of the question you just asked. Nigeria has to have a strategy for human capital development. There's nothing wrong with some of our people deciding to live abroad. After all, we get around $20 billion from them. And maybe if not for them, Naira will be 1,000 or 1,500 to the dollar by today, So there's value from that, but let's not be that we frustrate people to live out of our country. Of course, there are Americans who live outside of their country, So when people do it, let it be that they do it out of economic reasons and preferences, not out of frustration. When you do that to our people, then we are not, treating them well, and we're not making them proud to be Nigerians. We have to develop a strategy for us to be able to earn foreign exchange without leaving Nigeria. That's brain export. And for those who decide to leave, let them leave out of their own volition, voluntarily, not out of frustration.
Great stuff. Now, for a country that has seen two recessions, I think from between 2003 to 2021, 18 years, and of course, being able to come out of this recession, the CBN and other maybe fiscal and monetary side are saying that most of their policies and plans are futuristic, and that we'll see the success coming up in a matter of maybe months or years. So I'm looking at that. I don't know, you're an analyst, you see better than I do. Do you think that some of these interventions would reap the positives moving on as we move on? Of course, moving to an election year.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I don't know of any country that has everything working for them 100%. So countries do face challenges, right? But sometimes what you find is if you don't have the right policies, you make a bad situation even worse. And when it comes to policy choices, this is really what determines not only today, but what happens to you tomorrow. My view is that the most important policy decisions, we're not handling them with decisiveness. Look at first subsidy. We've said this 1,000,001 times, right? So someone has not been bold enough to address that problem. And today we are spending more money to subsidize petrol that we can't even properly account for than the money we are spending for every other important thing combined, from education to healthcare to infrastructure combined. So there's no way this can make sense and be the best way for us to build the Nigeria of today and the Nigeria of tomorrow that we are looking for. If you look at policies around, public-private partnership, you still see that, whether we want to have a private sector-led, country, you see governments still saying, they're doing Nigeria Air, they're trying to turn around the refineries. Government is still doing business. There's NNPC, right? That is still in the hand of government, whereas today, if we had privatized NNPC a few years back and is running and working efficiently, Nigeria should be making at least $10 billion in profit alone, or even taxes from NNPC. Not now that it has become, the source of pain and leakage for, the Nigerian economy, such that we, at least according to OPEC, we are spending more to import refined petroleum products than we are making from exporting crude oil. And we have been overtaken as the largest and, oil-producing economy in Africa. So those policy choices that are critical, the ones that are transformative, I think we could have done better. When it comes to monetary policy, exchange rates, they're usually, medium, short term to medium term. If anything happens tomorrow, rates might come down, it might go up, but the more strategic and long-term ones are those economic plans, they're the fiscal policies, There are the trade policies, industrialization policy. You have technology now defining the future of the world, and we are playing the back foot, right? Nobody is talking about what does it mean with the metaverse. Nobody is talking about the fourth industrial generation, rather, the fourth industrial revolution. We're not talking about that. And when it comes to even leadership, providing leadership within the African continent, we are not leading. Look at the African Continental Free Trade Area. Look at issues to do with diplomacy, international, geopolitics. We're not there. This is not who we are supposed to be as a country. We're supposed to be a giant, that is defining not only what's happening to Nigeria and Africa, but playing a key role within the global, the global space. There's a lot more we can do. I'm always a very hopeful person. I believe that we'll overcome our current challenges and Nigeria will rise again. But this is, how I see it as of today.
I know we've talked very much about debt and what's been happening with debt, and the argument has been, well, it's not really a challenge, it's a revenue challenge, not a debt challenge. That's what government is saying. Can we wrap up on that note? What do you make moving on with regards to our debt? It still remains scary.
Yeah, this conversation about whether it's a revenue challenge or a debt challenge,
yes.
It's the difference between six and half a dozen. We have a problem, right? Yeah, I do think that, what gives me a lot of concern are two things. Number one is, what are we borrowing for? So at some point this year, the federal government spent 119% of its revenue to service debt. We're not paying back just to service debt. In other words, the entire revenue retained by the federal government was not enough to service debt. Federal government had to borrow to balance the servicing of debt. In other words, they borrowed to do every other thing, including paying salaries. Now, that gives me a lot of concern. Even the Fiscal Responsibility Act does not permit you to borrow other than for human capital development and infrastructure. Now, we are borrowing for all manner of things. The second concern I have is the rate at which we borrow and the cost of borrowing. Many countries around the world, we borrow at 1%, some even at 0%. We borrow at double digits. On top of this, we've seen a lot of ways and means, now over 20 trillion, that is not properly accounted for as debt. So when you put all of this together, although in terms of global benchmark, our ratio is much lower than many countries, but in terms of the cost of those debts versus our revenue profile, it's alarming. And we have to try to look for a way to start making the turn before we get into a debt trap and a point of no return. But overall, if we fix issues with our revenue system, particularly ensuring that our leaders from the very top do the right thing, pay their own taxes, and they are prudent with the management of our resources, including tax revenue, we will begin to see an improvement. When I was a young boy, our parents paid taxes and they were proud to speak about it at the village square. Today, nobody cares about paying taxes. Maybe not so many people, I should say.
People
particularly
evade
the well-to-do and the politicians. They are evading taxes and they're getting away with it as if it doesn't matter.
Interesting conversation as usual. There I've been speaking to Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, who's a fiscal policy partner and African tax leader with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you on Business Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.